Hello fellow shooters, Duane here again, Airsoft Action's Island Insider here in Taiwan. Today we're going to be taking a look at my KIC Works CZ75 Shadow 2 again. I recently got the frame, the slide, the rear sight block and all the magazine bodies back from Refinishing. Many thanks to KIC Airsoft in the west of Taipei for their great service. They managed to shot blast all the old paint off and refinish the components in an excellent matte black, so that's very cool. So the frame's really looking nice now, no leftover deformation marks or scratches, really nice matte finish. And the top slide as well, looking very good. So and the rear sight block, so everything's looking much better, so many thanks to them. We've got all the magazines under here as well, but we'll leave those till later, set those to one side. I had originally contemplated anodizing the components with the help of my friends at Archwick, but having talked to Clarence Live further about this, he suggested using Cerakote, as the cast aluminium zinc alloys are not really suitable for accepting anodizing particularly well. So in the end I went with KIC and got the black Cerakoting done. So now the main components are all back, I'll begin the reassembly of the Shadow 2 and we'll go through the replacement components that have been kindly given for me to test by Clarence himself. First up we'll take a look at the top slide and its reassembly and the components involved. So put the frame off to one side. So to start off with, Clarence gave me his own machine front sight, which is CNC machined aluminium. So that's the CLPD, is the KJ-S2FFS, so front sight. Comes with red and green collimators, so these are like fibre optics which gather light and make it easier to see. So you've got yellow and pinky red kind of colour. I'll probably go with a red because the original was red. All of which makes it easier to see the sight at speed and pick it up for target acquisition when you're moving between targets. So let's open this up. So you get a nice little package. Clarence has got some nice branded tags for everything that he sells, and you get a little baggie inside as well. So the old Shadow 2 original front sight is like the collimator, but it's not truly light gathering. It's kind of a fake red plastic one that doesn't really gather the light as well as this, so this should stick out better. And you've got excess as well, so you can put that through there and then glue it and cut it. Okay, so we'll leave the thing off to one side for the moment, concentrate on dealing with the actual sight plate itself. So at the back here you can see it's got serrated finish so that you don't get any shine off it, and the front is obviously canted back like the original, so this just slides in to the original dovetail. Again, because it's been Cerakoted, it'll be quite stiff. So there's the original sight block, part 84, with the original collimator, part 84-1 knit. And you can see it's nowhere near as bright as the 1mm collimator that we got with the new one. And obviously that's very worn as well, it's taken quite a beating. But besides that, it's basically identical apart from the quality of construction and the fact it takes a smaller collimating dot, so it's finer aiming point. Okay, so put the old one to one side. We've got the new one in there, you can see it's lined up. So we need part 122, the cross pin that retains it. Start that off in there and then take a punch and finish persuading it home. There we go. Okay, so you can see that's reassembled part number 122. Lock that in there. I'll put the collimator in last because it requires cutting and gluing. Next we'll move towards the back and deal with the rear sight. So we need part number 140, the main sight block that's been repainted. The flapping rear sight unit itself, part number 142. We basically push that in like that and rotate it in. So there's a little pin on the back of part 142 that goes through the hole at the top and engages with the ratchets sort of knurls on the underside of part 143. That's the adjustment screw which basically forces the rear sight block down against the action of the spring that holds it up off the slide body. So just gently put that in just to start with, get it in place. So screw 143 goes in a little bit. And you can see that little nub sticking up engages with those and gives you a ratcheting motion. Part number 144, the spring goes underneath this hole at the bottom. That pushes the elevation upwards of the rear sight blade against that action of the screw. And then we can drift the whole thing in between the rear sight dovetails. So make sure that spring doesn't fly out. Okay, so with a bit of persuasion, that's back in the middle, and you see the spring at the back there working against the slide to push the elevation of the rear sight up. That's fairly central. If memory serves, I had to slightly push it to the right before to get my zeroing correct on the original shooting setup. I'll leave that there for the moment. So to hold it in place, not that it really needs it to be honest, because the Cerakote has made the dovetail quite tight, but just for completeness we need a 1.5 Allen key or Allen wrench attachment for parts number 156. These are the grub screws that hold the rear sight block in place, acting on that hardened insert that's pressed into the main top slide body. So just cinch them down gently. I don't really think it needs it to be honest, because it's such a tight fit now anyway, it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, so there we are. So that's the rear sight unit all back together. That can still flap around if you push down on it, but obviously the screw determines the height at which that sits, so I'll adjust that on the range at some point after I reassemble it. Now we have to reassemble the blowback unit. So to begin with, we'll put the gas nozzle system back together. Taking the nozzle itself, part number 32. Clarence has also supplied me with 2 whole sets of Shadow 2 internal springs to ensure mine can keep competing well into the long term. So that's the CLPD KJ-S2 ISS, so internal spring sets. So that encompasses all the springs needed, one of which is the valve return spring. So part number 75, the replacement part. So drop that into the main body of the nozzle, which is part number 32. That goes down inside there. Next we have part number 35, which is the shuttle valve itself. We can drop that in on top of that, make sure it seats in down there, into the channel. Something like a punch to push it in if we need to, so you can see the spring, the return spring's acting against it there. And then across the back of that, we need to insert the cross pin, part number 48. So you can see it's got a slightly fattened head one side. That basically goes in left to right as you look down the axis of the nozzle, as if this is the front. So there's the bottom of the gas inlet, so we need to push that in slightly, and obviously we'll have to push down on the nozzle and the try and avoid doing that. So again, so push down on that, put the cross pin through to retain part number 48, the cross pin going through there, so just give it a bit of a tap. And that's now holding the valve in place beneath. With that back together, we can start processing the rest of the blowback unit, the actual internal components of it. Once again, Clarence has given me a very nice replacement blowback housing. So the actual original is a single cast piece, which is pretty heavy and obviously quite a complicated part. He's designed this CNC machined assembly. So this is the Shadow 2 7075 Superlight Blowback Housing Unit, KJ-S2 ALS LBBH. So this is a nice bronzed finish. So it replaces the single piece part with 2 separate pieces, very, very lightweight. You've got the threaded section at the front to accept the screw which retains the rubber gasket, which is the piston seal. So that sits on there like that, and the screw will thread in there in a minute. At the back you've got 2 pins and another threaded section, so this all goes together like so. So you've got the 2 flats, and obviously you've got the hole at the top there that goes and lines up with that. So it's the L-shaped piece. Basically it replaces this whole cast component, which is part number 15. So we've now got a 2-part thing which is machined, much nicer finish and way lighter. This is actually down to just under 7 grams. So this thing is about 28 grams, this is 7, so this is 75% weight reduction by using Clarence's component here, so much lighter, which will give you a much faster speed and cycle time, because the slide will be lighter and it'll be more gas efficient as a result as well. So with that together, we can put in part number 94, piston seal retention bolts, so we just seat that in the front there, tighten it down, there we go. So just experiment with that to get it to sit right. It needs to be stood off a little bit of a gap, so that it can actually deform around the mushroom of the head there. Okay, so that goes back on like so. Okay, that's nicely seated there. Important note, part 109, this shoe is still required. Even with the upgrade component, you can see there's a divot at the back where it lines up nicely with it. So this is a wear component that basically resets the hammer as the whole unit flies back over it within the slide. So with that back together, we can then put all that inside. There we go. Back together like that. And importantly, before we put this back in, we need to remember that there's the spring. As we put this back together, part number 92, the nozzle return spring needs to go into this slot in the top face of the slide towards the front there, and that will interact with this nub on the gas nozzle itself. So put that whole system back in there, towards the back there, make sure it's seated, hold it down, test the function. So that's working. So with that back in, part number 76 can go through the firing pin channel. You need a 2.5 Allen key head to tighten all that down. Nice and tight, there we are. So you can see the spring's working in there. That whole thing looks very nice. So with that whole unit in, you can see there that replaces part number 15 with the 2 components. Brass finished, much lighter. Next we can reassemble the barrel unit. So first take the internal barrel. Clarence has actually given me a 6.01mm precision internal barrel, as well as an A+ studio hop unit. That's the Revolution hop rubber. For the moment, I'm going to leave these out because I want to test the setup with the standard barrel first, and then I'll switch that out later to do a comparison between performance. Now that I've got the new blowback unit and all the other components, I'll just test the original hop and barrel first, and then see what the difference is between the two. So I've got the original barrel and the hop unit. So barrel is part number 43, the hop rubber is part number 40. Got the original stirrup system and the shells of the hop. So part number 17 is the right hand side. The hop rubber has this little nub in which sits in like that. Before that we need to put the stirrup system on the front, so this is composed of part number 29, the main ring. Part number 18 is the adjustment screw, and part number 93 is the spring. So that all goes on from the front, and it's important that this little notch in the side goes on the right side facing backwards, because that aligns nicely around that where the nub is on the hop. So that's all back together. That puts downward pressure from the top dead center by tightening this screw against the spring to drag that down and apply hop. So with that back together, you can go back into the right hand side, which is 17. You can see there the screw comes out underneath, so you can adjust it with a slide off. And then part number 16, the left hand clamshell, can go back together on that as well. And to hold the whole thing together, we've got 2 screws, again parts number 78, which go in these holes. So that's the main barrel assembly all back together. Now we can put it back inside the external barrel. So this is the third one of these. This was number 2. You can see the hairline fracture going up one side. Obviously they changed the design to get rid of the cutout on this side, which saved it, but we still need to cut out on one side for the crosspin to go through. So you can see the fracturing from CO2 magazine use creeping up to the top there. And at that point I swapped it out for another new barrel, the version 2. Just before my last competition. So again, cut out only on one side, that's been filled in to give it more strength. So inner barrel assembly goes into part number 3, the external barrel, just slide it in. And then this cross pin, part number 53, I've already cut this down, it's basically half what it used to be, because again it's only going in one side. So part 53 goes in there, and gives you the browning action. Clarence has already announced actually his own fixed barrel that he's working on at the moment. So that should be coming along soon, but if you want to do a custom one, you can basically grind these locking lugs off with a Dremel so that it doesn't engage with the top slide, and then maybe find some way of fixing the hop unit in place so that it doesn't move. That'll give you a much more accurate solution, as well as reducing the risk of this breakage that I keep getting, because basically when the CO2 fires the CO2 magazine, there's a lot higher velocity of the slide, and that puts a lot of stress on this, and that's why I end up with the cracks. Now we can look at the recoil spring assembly. So part number 22 is the main pin, part number 42 is this plastic collar which goes over like that with the ring pointing that way. Clarence has also supplied me with his softened competition upgrade kit, the Magic Recoil Spring. So here you can see the original. It's quite stout. This is a harder one that one of my team members gave me, and this is the Clarence Lai Project Design softened recoil spring. So you can see it's non-continuous in terms of the actual coils. So put the sharper coils to the back. This has to be used in conjunction with his custom OEM magazine lips. If you don't use these, the softer spring won't have the power to overcome the resistance of the rounds through the feed lips. So you need to use the feed lips on all your magazines if you want to use the softened recoil spring. So you can see the difference here. So his OEM hand polished ones on the right and the original on the left, you can see there's a massive difference in terms of the mouth. So he's hand polished these to the point where the rounds come out a lot easier with a lot less resistance. So you can have a much more gas efficient gun because it's not fighting the spring and the retention pressure of those lips, and the recoil spring can be softer as a result to give you a nice soft crisp recoil that loses less gas and is faster to cycle. So with that back together with the new spring, I'll put the old ones to one side. This can be a bit of a pain to get it back in. Sometimes I find it easier to hold the spring back to give you more wiggle room. So put that into there. Because it's an old design, it's non-captive, not like the modern Glock things, so it can be a bit of a pain. Put that in like that, seat it, there we go. So that's the top slide completely back together. So front sight, rear sight, recoil unit, main barrel, and the recoil spring assembly. That's all back together. Right guys, as this is getting to be an already long video, nearly 20 minutes just on the top slide, I'll take a break there and we'll come back and finish off doing the frame and final assembly for the rest of the gun in a separate video afterwards.